Well, I hope you're all subscribers. It's free, and we cover a 5-state region in the Midwest, but we're also building out a network nationally. So we have writers in the Northeast, the Southeast, in Denver and the Intermountain states, and I assume we're going to get to the West Coast soon with the help of money from McKnight Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago, and elsewhere. And this is sort of just a new way of doing journalism in the United States, where nonprofit organizations step forward and give money to media organizations who do niche reporting on different topics. And our niche has been for, I think, 6 or 8 years now, clean energy, and especially looking at kind of nitty-gritty policy things that a lot of other newspapers and TV aren't going to touch with a 10-foot pole because it's too hard to write about and too hard to make interesting. There are a lot of things I thought about I could talk to you guys today because you're all energy nerds, so we sort of speak the same language. But I thought community solar gardens would be a good one, and then we can branch off into other topics after the presentation. I'm happy to talk about recent stories I've read, and I've just been talking a lot to Organic Valley about a big project in Wisconsin that's been fascinating. But for community solar gardens, as you guys know, Minnesota is the national leader and continues to be the national leader in it. So I thought we'd first look at some statistics about the gardens and some issues at the legislature about the gardens, and also the relationship between developers and Excel. So let's see if I can make this work. Current state, we got 585 megawatts roughly of development. I think that's completed. 200 projects, 286 more projects in various stages of development. These are the three. Dakota, Chicago, and Stearns have more than 50 megawatts of community solar. It's pretty easy to see if you drive down I-35 and other spots to see these gardens in those communities. The number of applications is declining, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The subscription trends are as follows. We got total 16,000 subscriptions. I think that's the most of any community solar garden program in the country. 85% are from individuals, roughly 13,000 people. The subscribed capacity is 85%, however, commercial. That means nonprofits and businesses are buying the majority of the capacity of the gardens. The value of solar payment structure is having a negative impact. A lot of discussion of that. And the decline in the solar investment tax credit begins next year. So it drops from 30 to 26. That has pushed a lot of development to this year and last year to get in before that drop. There's also a move in Congress that has some bipartisan support to kind of keep it at that 30% tax credit. I don't know what's going to happen to that. I have my doubts. And I grabbed this from John Farrell because he's often got great graphs. This kind of tells the story of community solar. A lot of interest in the beginning, a lot of those didn't come to fruition. And then you see this, this kind of steady hum here, a lot of movement in 2017, a little dip in 2018, then it zooms right back up, and my sense is it's going to start to go back down a little bit again because the value of solar does not give as much money per kilowatt hour as does the applied retail rate. And all the gardens that were built under what they call the applied retail rate are almost done. So that's when developers can make a lot of money. This value of solar is like a 2 to 3 cent difference per kilowatt hour. So that makes it a little harder for people to build community solar gardens.
Could you spend a minute explaining that? So somebody builds a community solar garden, and a subscriber gets a bill credit,
Yep.
and they pay for their subscription.
Right.
Okay, so where does the issue come in with value of solar and retail?
That's a really good question. So if you built it if you got it approved 2 or 3 years ago,
Yeah.
under this applied retail rate,
Yeah.
you would get, I think, 13, I don't know if anybody knows, 13 to 14 cents a
Yeah.
kilowatt hour. But then the state and clean energy organizations like Fresh Energy said we should really do this value of solar, take into account the pollution that isn't polluted and look at how distributed energy impacts the grid in a positive way and add that all together. So there's a very complex formula that is value of solar. Well, when that happened, it dropped to pretty much, I think, 9.8 or 10 cents a kilowatt hour that Xcel would pay you, the developer, or you, the subscriber, for the power that was subscribed. So that's a 2-cent difference per kilowatt hour. That's actually a lot of money over a number of years. And if I should say, value of solar fluctuates, but it's still a lot less than, so far, less than this applied retail rate. And so the PUC, a lot of these early gardens, and I think they're almost done, but if you got your garden approved in 2017 under this ARR, and you might not finish it till this year, but you still get whatever it was initially, what that rate was in 2017. So one thing about community solar, it is never anything like real simple to describe to people. Even the way it's created. Okay, it has a minimum of 5 subscribers. Has to be 5 subscribers. And if you're a subscriber, you got to buy from a community solar garden that's either in the county you live in or one of the counties adjacent to the county you live in. So there's all these restrictions that apply.
That wasn't by accident.
And that wasn't by accident, no. So it wasn't. And now there's talk like maybe they should change that, and maybe you should be able to buy subscription from Western Minnesota to help a community out there. So
the value of solar is lower than the value of nuclear generated electricity.
Yes. And
including, if you generate electricity using coal or nuclear, there's a cost.
Right.
And then you add on the cost of the pollution.
Right.
And so solar is obviously cheaper to produce.
Right.
But it has the same value as, in fact, it's, all right.
You would think it would be higher. You would think. I mean, the theory was that it would actually be higher. The theory has not actually happened.
Now who established this value of solar?
The state of Minnesota established it, and we should say we're the first state to do it. Only Austin, Texas, until Minnesota did it. Go ahead.
Some Daryl, I know, and some others of you were at those meetings at the in St. Paul when they established the value of solar.
Yeah, go ahead and talk about it.
The value of solar was supposed to be the adder to the retail rate.
Right.
And instead it became just the rate.
Right.
But there was a famous quote by the chairman of Xcel when they asked about pollution, and he said, "We don't pay for mercury pollution. We don't pay for air pollution."
Yeah.
You should have heard the gasp in this crowd. A nice article in the Star Tribune, but that was where, like I say, it went sort of sideways.
Yeah.
Because it's it was bringing it from. That was the add-on
Right.
to the retail rate. This is how
Right.
much you can do it. And when they dropped it down, then of course made them smaller. That's why the economics changed.
Yeah, there's an argument now. There's a University of Minnesota professor, Gabriel Chan, who has written a lot about this. That he feels like the state is not incorporating enough of the credits for distribution and things like that in solar. So it'll be interesting to see if this becomes a real argument at the legislature or not. It's, one thing about being the leader is also in piloting all these projects like our state has done. I mean, we're kind of ground zero to see if this thing works, if value of solar works. Not many other municipalities or states are anywhere near doing it. I don't think California does it, and Austin, as far as I know, was one of the only ones that had piloted it. I don't know, am I missing anybody? Colorado's done some. I don't think that it's totally the slam dunk for a community solar there. I don't know how they actually determine theirs. Xcel has I was thinking Xcel has, like, love it or hate it, they are working with the 2 leading states with community solar, Colorado, which for a long time was the leader, and then Minnesota, which is now the leader, and they happen to both be served majority by Xcel, which is kind of interesting. So speaking of riders, the Public Utilities Commission approved this rider for the problem with, as I described before, the problem is like, well, there's all these big businesses, actually, nonprofits benefiting by community solar. And Excel would go to the legislature and say, you guys thought the program was going to be a bunch of neighbors getting together and sharing solar. Well, the program is Ecolab got a great deal on power, and so 3M's looking at it, and all these people, big corporations, are buying the power, and there's not enough individuals that are subscribers. I mean, look, 85% subscribed by big companies. So, so then the PUC decided that they would add a little rider, a 1.5 cent rider, to this value of solar. Give it a little boost, take that 10 cents to 11.5 cents to kind of create some energy for residential subscriptions rather than commercial subscriptions. And so this Clean Choice, they came into our state last year and they created like a really nice web platform where you go on, you put in your, where you live, and then they automatically sign you up for a garden and they give you a discount. So their play was basically the developer of the solar garden, or the owner, would come to them and say, we want to sell to residential customers. And they would say, great, we're going to set up this website, we'll market it, we'll do it all for you, and we'll sell it. So the first year they were here, last year, I wrote a story, they sold out 42 megawatts. That's, a fairly significant amount. That's almost 10% of the whole state's community solar, and they did it in 6 months. So there's a lot of interest among consumers, but a lot of the first companies that did community solar really didn't know how to market it very well. And then, the bill, you brought up the bill credit. I mean, then you'd have to describe this stuff to people, and it wasn't really very clear. It sounded like it could be a con job. So these guys created what I think is like a really slick website and an easy way to sign up for community solar. Then this year, another owner came to them and said, we've got 8 gardens, we got 20 megawatts, sell the subscriptions for us. So they announced that, and I think they've already sold out that amount. But they also told me that without this rider, we can no longer continue to sell residential subscriptions. It's just not enough money for the developer, and it's not enough money for the people who are marketing to residential subscribers like us.
So did Excel, the PUC approved it, but Excel did not?
No, they approved it, but they only approved it for 1 year, and then it drops to like 0.5 next year. So it's 1.5 cents this year to a value of solar that I think is around 10 cents right now, somewhere around in there. So that little boost is just enough for developers to make money and for them to hire marketing firms like this to come in and help market the product. Otherwise, like most developers will tell you, hey, the easiest way to do this is for me to go out, sell 40% of a garden to one company, 40% to another, and sell 3 more subscriptions to companies. I don't have to do the residential market at all. Who needs it? I can sell 5 subscriptions, I'm done. And that's what happened a lot in the early years of it. There were very few residential only gardens, or very few, people would sell out like 10% of a garden to residents, or 20%, but they'd get that base first of 2 clients willing to buy 40% of their gardens, and that's how the economics worked. Go ahead.
When the PUC approved it, I heard them say some things along the lines of, well, we'll do it just for a year and a second year, and then we'll look at it again. Do you know anything about, is there anything in the works for extending it or looking at it further?
I think they'll keep looking at it further. I think they want to find out how long, if they're really going to lose a lot of people, if this residential market goes away. I should mention that both Clean Choice was actually selling to developers on behalf of owners who wanted residential garden only. So they just said, let's just fill it with residents, and we'll make enough money off that. We don't need businesses. So I think most of the gardens they're working with are almost all residential subscribers, or close to it. So the PUC will keep that docket open. Everything's always open at the PUC. There's always a docket open, and they're always going to keep studying this. But that's sort of what it looks like now. So here's some of the things I've kind of looked at. Xcel this year came in and said, this program isn't working. We can build this stuff a lot cheaper. We can build it for 8 cents a kilowatt hour, do utility scale solar. We can own the gardens and sell them to our customers and save everybody a lot of money. This community solar garden program costs too much. It's $120 million a year extra over what we could give people. They got the attention of David Osmek, the Republican Senate lead, and he was advocating for them. The legislation went nowhere because it would never pass the House or be signed by the governor. So
I'm sure that if Xcel guaranteed that the ratepayers' fees would go down, then the Democrats would be happy to pay it.
Yeah, it seems like our rates keep going up, even though the cost of solar keeps going down.
We can reduce the cost.
So I mean that's part of the issue. The impact of a diminishing rider, I think, will continue to be studied. The investment tax credit, probably going to go down, but who knows? Maybe they'll come to an agreement in Congress. That's a federal tax credit, not a state one. And if the solar incentives decline, but the price declines on panels, that there might be some wiggle room in there.
Do you see a decline in soft costs, the non-solar actual cost, like the overhead?
Yeah, that's a good question, because this clean choice. I mean, what they did is come in and create a system that they could replicate in several different states to sell community solar.
Right.
So nobody had to do. If you owned a community solar garden and said, "I'd love to have residents. I don't know how to do this. I don't want to set up all these accounting systems and websites." They're the turnkey for this right now.
Right.
So that's how the soft costs were reduced for marketing in that case.
That was always the problem with residential, is the soft costs are so expensive. Other jurisdictions are doing them for $1.75 a watt. Here, everybody still wants to get over $3.
Over $3, yeah. That's a whole other issue we can talk about for hours. So lately I've been, and you guys are involved in low-income community solar, this organization, so jump in on this, because I'm far from the expert, but I thought it'd be interesting to look at different approaches to connecting to people who actually really need a deal on their utility bills, right? I mean, if I joined a community solar garden and I eventually, after year 10, I might get $30 a month off my bill, which would be fantastic, but I don't need it as bad as a lot of people in Minnesota need it. And if there's a way to get them involved, I think a lot of the advocates early on thought, this would be great for low-income communities to be able to engage with community solar. So I'm going to show you some of the ways that they are engaging right now. Speaking of Xcel, they got approved a low-income community solar garden on St. Paul's East Side in a neighborhood called Railroad Island, right near Metropolitan State University. And a friend of mine is a developer in that neighborhood, and he has not seen a solar panel yet. And this was approved. It was supposed to be 1 megawatt. It was approved, I think, 2 years ago. So is anybody on the east side, from the east side here? Have you seen any activity? I have yet. I bike over there. I haven't seen anything.
Follow the money.
Yeah, he said that they said, well, I mean that they were going to put it on the side of a kind of a not a cliff, but a bluff, and it was too rough, and then they had a lot of excuses why it couldn't be as big as they said it was going to be, and nothing has been done. So they say that they're going to do community solar. We have yet to see it. In Minneapolis, there's a bunch of, including on top of this church, there's a lot of efforts. The Shiloh Temple, I don't know, I probably figure a lot of you already are familiar with that. Yeah. It was sort of a project of the Interfaith Power and Light and the Just Solar Coalition. Subscribers included a mosque, low-income residents who have credit scores too low for commercial community solar gardens. So basically the church would cover low-income. If somebody defaulted on their payments, the church would step forward and pay the difference. This housing project in Mankato, that was sort of interesting. They bought 17 subscriptions on behalf of residents there, and they just did that this year, so we'll see how that works out. Most community solar gardens, market rate ones, want you to have a credit score of 700 or at least 600. Well, a lot of these people, they're nowhere near those credit scores, so they can't subscribe on their own to community solar. So the idea is, how can we create systems where they don't have to rely on credit scores? And they're looking at maybe saving $100,000 over the next 25 years in Mankato, which is significant for a nonprofit housing organization. The advantages are, as I mentioned, the credit scores. They're removed. The challenges to low-income subscribers is really they move a lot. They don't own their homes. They live in apartments. And all of this, the idea of community solar subscriptions really fits them in a lot of ways, because if they move within the territory of their community solar, they can keep that subscription. If they move into another house, they can keep that subscription. So it's just the flexibility of community solar is so much better than almost anything else that I think has been created in Minnesota to help these subscribers. And also most of the community solar gardens have turn-ins that are pretty easy. You can turn in for like $100 or less.
It's just important to make note that not all low-income people have bad credit scores.
That's true, yeah.
Some low-income people own their own homes, and some low-income people stay in their homes for many years.
Yeah.
Like, retired people who are living on Social Security, but who have only Social Security income, but savings.
Right.
So there are low-income people who are upstanding, responsible citizens.
Yes, and
and there are low-income people with low credit scores who are still upstanding. They just can't manage their finances.
Yeah, and the other, just 1 second, is when I talked to Minnesota Power about this, she's like, you're right, they own their own home, but for them to go out and buy solar panels for their home, it's just too expensive. It's way beyond their limited means. And they might have a roof that's not so great for it, or there's a tree. So, that's what makes the flexibility really good on community solar.
Frank, out of that number of gardens that are out there, do you know what percentage are low-income gardens? Is it 10, 25?
Boy, I don't know. It'd be pretty low, I think, that's a great question. And that is not in the monthly Excel report that I know of. A lot of this comes from the legislature a few years ago, required Excel to submit a monthly report on community solar gardens, which you can find at the Public Utilities website. And it's kind of interesting, you can see the growth month after month, and I think they actually have been arguing that they don't want to do this report anymore, that there's other ways to do it. But I found it as a journalist really valuable to look at this and to see trends and to see what's happening in that community. That would have been a great statistic to get for this had I thought about it. Now, I think you guys know about the Rural Renewable Energy Alliance, Jason Edens. I think he's doing some really interesting work too. He uses these low-income home energy assistance program money to help pay for solar arrays at 3 different locations now. He also does. He also installs solar for low-income residents in rural parts of Minnesota. But this is a new project that he's embarked upon, and he has one at Leech Lake and in Vermont, and in I think it's Little Falls. I'll get to that in a minute. His idea is I'm going to build a community solar garden, but I'm going to give it to a nonprofit, and then we're not going to sell subscriptions. We're just going to build this thing. It'll produce power. The local utility will buy the power. That money will then go back to help the residents pay for their electricity bills. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. It's a little different model. It's not like the program the state legislature set up. but he still calls it community solar, and it still works to benefit communities. And so the Leech Lake project, I think it was 230 kilowatts. The tribe owns the panels are on tribal-owned buildings, and then the power is sold to one of the 5 utilities that service the tribe, and then they take that money that's collected and they use it to defray the cost of low-income residents. I think the first year it was like 12 or 13,000, but it seemed like it was a truncated year. I read a report on the program on their website, and it looked like it was only 6 months, so they might be getting 20 or 30,000 by now. The second one was this Tri-County Community Partnership, 22 kilowatt array in Little Falls, and this power is going to be used to help disabled vets in their homes. And then they're also going to weatherize these homes on top of it to kind of reduce these people's costs. They did the same thing in Vermont last year, and again, the proceeds are used. They sell the power, and then the proceeds are used to help defray the costs for low-income residents. This is kind of a really cool one, I think. It's not that big, but I really enjoyed talking to these people. You've probably all been to Duluth, and you've gone down 35, and you pass Lincoln Park, and Lincoln Park's kind of this sort of like a northeast almost neighborhood in Duluth. It's become trendy. There's restaurants, there's craft breweries, there's the Duluth Grill, there's Frost, the maker of bags, is in that neighborhood. So it's really an up-and-coming neighborhood, but still has a bit of poverty. So in this spot, this is 35, I think, to our right, they're going to build a community solar garden, 40 kilowatts, and they're going to take the money that they're going to take the electricity sales. Minnesota Power has agreed to buy the power, and they're going to take that money, and a quarter of it goes to a veterans home, homeless veterans home, and 75% will be put together, and then that will become a fund that they will administer for people who are about to get their electricity turned off or their utilities turned off. So they can come to Ecolibrium 3 and say, hey, I can't make the payment. You know, it's December, it's really cold, and these people will come in and help. They're going to pay maybe a month or two, but they're also going to get them other services and help so that they can make it through the winter, maybe help weatherize their home. I don't think they've totally figured out that part of it, but that's their plan, basically. The other interesting thing about it is they got the community involved, and then they found out that, hey, why don't we make the community garden something that we could be, it won't just sit there as panels, like let's make it a gathering area. So they got some local artists together who are going to curate outdoor art shows at this solar garden. And they're going to build the panels up 8 or 10 feet so people can walk under them. I assume there might be pollinator-friendly gardens underneath. And in that way, they'll be able to have a place where people can congregate, you know. And so it won't be necessarily fenced in like most solar gardens are. I think it's going to be a little more open than that. And they've generated a lot of excitement. I think they've even generated some national reporting on it. The woman who I spoke to said this is at an interchange in Duluth where 535 goes to Wisconsin, 35 is there, and there's one other road there. And she goes, this represents 1.5% of all the bridge pavement in the state of Minnesota as it goes through Duluth and goes to Wisconsin.
What's the schedule on this one?
They want to get it done by the end of the year. Partially because there's all this road construction that's about to start. That road to Wisconsin is going to be closed for 2 years because they got to repave it and fix it. So, and they've been raising money locally for it. I get a lot of emails from them, and they're very excited to get this thing off the ground. Minnesota Power does have money, and they're very engaged in this. They're hugely supportive. They had a program called, I think, Solar Sense, and this was their first project out of that. So, so they've got they've got a lot going for them, but they still need to raise some money for it. So what's next in the low-income space? Funding's still a challenge. I mean, all these projects are really tiny. You know, they're not big. They're not affecting a whole neighborhood. Even the Shiloh project is, I don't think any of them is a megawatt even of power. And you know, there's still a lot of agreements to be made with utilities. Somebody's got to buy all this power, right? And they want to make sure, the utility wants to make sure that they're not going to get screwed by whatever the power purchase agreement is. So all those details have to be worked out. And there's all these funding. These are not easy things. They're often like 8 or 10 funding sources, or 5 or 6 that are involved in these projects. And so somebody's got to bring this all together. It's not easy. And then Xcel wants to get in on it too. You know, they're building community solar gardens in Wisconsin now because they don't have a program like we do, and they're talking to the PUC about doing more low-income community solar gardens.
Are they funding and building them themselves?
Yeah.
Which is what they like to do.
Which is what they'd like to do. Yeah, I think they, you know, their argument is, hey, we can do it cheaper than all these. I mean, Real's great, but we could build it. They're not going to compete with Real, but they're going to say that we can build it cheaper than all these other organizations because we have the buying power. You know, we're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So
When Xcel says they're building it, does that mean they bid out to developers to do the job?
they would bid out to installers to do the job. Yeah.
Installers to
Yeah.
do the job.
And then they would own it after that. I think they want more ownership of solar, but they haven't actually stepped forward with that much yet.
And they don't require electricians.
Yeah.
The utility doesn't require electricians to put up the racking and stuff.
I think the state law requires.
If you're a utility, you're not.
Yeah.
Oh, they get around that. That's interesting. 'Cause that's been a debatable issue.
Frank, another question, a little bit off of Excel for a minute. What's your thoughts, or what do you know about what's going on, like with the 20 co-ops in the state? Now, some of them have community solar gardens, and some of them, like Nexus and like Dakota Electric,
Yeah.
has got solar gardens, but they're not community solar gardens.
Right.
They're strictly for production. Do you have a sense of like how many of the co-ops are putting in community solar gardens? I know some of them have them.
Yeah, some of them have them. In Minnesota Power has one so far, 1 megawatt community solar garden, but that, of course, is owned by utility. The co-ops that I've seen, I'm just thinking in GRE's territory, Dakota Electric just did a 2 megawatt install that they cut the ribbon on recently. I mean, this week, I think.
They're putting in a new 3 megawatt right behind their headquarters.
It, but I think that's all to
That's
generate
all
for them.
Production
Yeah.
and I've been pushing, I'm in Apple Valley, and I've been pushing them like, hey, come on, because I can get the city of Apple Valley that's on Dakota Electric to buy from that garden, except they won't make it available to the city, for example.
Right.
And so they're saying, well, we can't do that because we're under contract with GRE for this amount of energy, and so we can't, open it up to the public, and I'm having a hard time buying that because there's other co-ops that are doing it.
Right. I've written about co-ops with community solar gardens. Off the top of my head, I can't think of how many there are. I think there too, it's very laborious because they often, as you know, they have small numbers of people who are co-op members and
Dakota Electric has like 100,000 people.
Well, Conexus and Dakota should be doing it because
Conexus has 130,000 people as members.
Conexus does have one. They do have a community solar.
And Right Hennepin has one. They had like one of the first in the state.
Yeah, Right Hennepin had an interesting model. You actually bought the panel, so it was $850, I think, and you could go in and you'd say, I want 2 panels, I want 3 panels, I want 4 panels. They would actually assign you a number and charge you in that way. I don't know that many other co-ops have actually done the per panel cost.
I was curious because I saw a list last week with maybe like 10 co-ops that had bought into that kind of thing. So I was just curious if you happen to know.
In Winona, there's one too that's doing community solar. I can't think of the name of it, but I know Chris Meyer from CERTS is involved in that project.
We get a lot of calls at MRES asking about that, and a lot of the people are in Minnesota Valley or co-ops, and it just always bums me out that it's only if they're on Excel they can really do it so easily. So
it's just, and the whole self-generation, I've been thinking of a story on that too, because it turns out, oddly enough, Wisconsin Dairyland seems to offer a lot more flexibility to their clients as to how much clean energy they can self-generate. 10-20%, where Gray River Energy, I think the limit is 5%. So, but that's a good question. I mean, I just know that outside of the two big ones, it gets a lot harder, because some of these co-ops have 10,000 members, and I guess you could fill a 40 or 80 kilowatt garden, but you probably can't fill a huge garden, and you have to. But but when I talk to them, they've all said, that there is demand, absolutely. I mean, they're hearing more and more from their constituents that there should be more options for investing in clean energy. And the easiest way for people to invest in clean energy is through community solar gardens, I think.
There's a couple of churches talking about it too, where they take care of their own energy needs. Then they already have a community now, just getting people to buy in, and seems like that would be an awesome way for like small communities to go. So
yeah, I mean, I did a whole one on. I didn't put it in this slides deck, but I did a whole story 3 or 4 years ago about all the churches that have 40 kilowatts. Some are technically community solar, some aren't. But there's probably 10 or 20 churches here in the Twin Cities, and some outstate ones too that do it.
I believe there's something like 5 generation transmission utilities that serve the co-ops of the state of Minnesota. Each of those have their own, and like you say, general, Great River Energy has 5%, no more than 5%.
Right.
Can be generated by the local utility. And in Wisconsin, I don't know what it is. I know I worked on one that was, the Dairyland was the generation transmission utility. Yeah. And this was a local co-op.
Yeah.
I think they stayed under 5%, but I don't know, I didn't recall them being forced to that. But some of these co-ops have signed 70-year contracts, where for the next 70 years, they're going to be bound by that contract, but they can't go over 5%.
Right. That's, there's a generation one near Rochester, I'm blanking on the name right now, but that one, a lot of members were asking to get out of their contract because it was a coal-based GT.
Because it's a coal-based utility, and the people would like to not have coal-based electricity, but their co-op has signed that contract for so many years worth of that generation.
Right.
Too much stranded assets.
Yes. Well, Rochester Public Utilities got out of the contract.
When solar started to take off, when the incentives were out there, when it was 90 cents on the dollar in discounts, Great River Energy went out and signed off long-term contracts with everybody because they were trying to sell Big Stone 1, Big Stone 2.
Right.
And so these guys, I remember in those meetings, he goes, "No, you don't understand. I'm losing money now, and you build solar, I'll just lose more money."
Right.
And they were they knew what they were doing when they signed in people up to those long-term contracts to keep solar.
To keep them, to keep other sources out, and that's been. There's a good one in Baldwin, by the way. I know off 94, a community solar that we've written about that's been quite successful. And right now, nationally, I would say that everybody's talking about Illinois. Illinois passed a very good piece of clean energy legislation. I think it was last year. They've got a new governor. Things are functioning a little better there now. And a lot of, as you cover community solar, you realize that there's a lot of actually national players in it now. There's people buying community solar gardens that are big national players. Yes, Cypress Springs being one of them. And they're looking now toward Illinois. And Illinois is going to give them pretty favorable rates. So that in the Midwest, Illinois is the next big one. Michigan too. Ohio probably not so much. I mean, they'll have some activity there, but Ohio's a place totally different than Minnesota. They're trying to figure out how to charge ratepayers to keep coal plants open, to keep nuclear plants that are way beyond their license open. So you want to save a lot of problems. Ohio's our reporter there is busy constantly breaking stories. We don't have that problem here, and the Dakotas are a lost cause. I don't think they'll be anything up there in terms of community solar, at least. There may be solar and wind, of course, but not so much solar. And I think their resource for solar is probably pretty good.
You see them solar people coming back here because of the governor wanting the renewable energy.
Yeah,
energy.
Yeah. That's a great question, because I think I mean a lot of Fortune 500 stepped forward and said, hey, we support this. This isn't a burden at all on us. If you want to go to 80% by 2030, go ahead, or at least 50% by 2030, and 100% maybe by 2050. And the Republicans are really resistant to, I think they're resistant to the kind of setting a goal, and forcing business. They see it as like forcing businesses to change their behavior. I think it's a philosophical debate, really. But Michael Noble, who is who started Fresh Energy, his argument, and I think he's probably got some validity, is that we have two of the biggest solar and wind installers in the country are in Minnesota. Mortenson, which I think does a fourth of all the bases in the world for wind turbines. I mean, they got people working all over the world. And Blattner is pretty big in wind and huge in solar too. So when you see these big photos of these huge California installations, and then you read who the installer was, it's often Mortenson or Blattner, cold weather state.
I just read a week ago that Mortenson is like number 3 in the US for solar.
Yeah, you look at the Bloomberg listing, Blattner, Mortenson, top 5, every single one. And he says the reason why is because Minnesota passed legislation, both in the 90s and in the 2007 under Pawlenty, that created a market for wind and solar, and also created companies that were looking at that going, hey, we can make a buck in this field, let's do it, and train a whole cadre of new workers in our state. And I think as much as, when you talk to Republicans, that's the sales point they kind of like, because Blattner's not some big city company. It's in Avon, it has people who live here and work here at its offices, but their biggest office, their headquarters is in Avon, Minnesota. I mean, they're rural, they are the rural success story for clean energy. These guys employ hundreds of people. Blattner. Yeah, Mortensen's in Golden Valley, but Blattner is in Avon. It's on the way to Alexandria. Got tempted to pull off the freeway and check out their headquarters at some point. But I mean that's to me that's creating employment in places that haven't had a lot of good employment lately. And the McKnight Foundation, I don't know if you've watched the 18-minute video. Has anybody seen that? They have on their website, they did a whole video on they talk to people in small towns about who have clean energy jobs and how it's changed their lives. And it's a really good, effective video. You can find it on their website. I think if you just Google McKnight film clean energy, it'll pop right up. And that's well worth watching, because there's people in these small towns that were going to leave, right? They were leaving. I mean, they were 25, 26, couldn't find a job, or there weren't any jobs to even find. And the wind developer came in. They only needed 5 or 10 people, but that's a lot of people in a small town. 5 or 10 jobs is, in a town of 500 people, that's a decent chunk of employment. And they stayed. And there are people that wanted to stay, but they felt like they'd end up here, right? Because they had to leave their small town to get a job. Well, it's creating wealth in small communities. I mean, if you look at a map of the United States, I did a couple stories on this, and you look at who's benefited in particular by wind energy. Almost all of it is Republican districts, all the way down to Texas, all through Oklahoma, all Kansas. you know, Iowa, all these places are rural America, and they all voted for Trump. Like, it's amazing when you see the maps, like 80 or 90%. So, and in Minnesota too, you know, I mean, Trump country is where a lot of these wind turbines are, and so I mean that it's kind of the convincing of because the Democrats are sold in it, the governor's sold in it. I mean, and the corporations I think here are like really excited to be able to, you know, 3M just announced 100% renewable about 2 months ago. I don't remember if it was 2030 or 2040. So a lot of corporations are on board. It's just getting the next step to get to the Republicans to agree it's a good idea. And they did under Pawlenty. That's the interesting thing.
That's because he thought he was going to be president.
That's right. And then he kind of rejected it. He kind of went, well, I didn't really sign that. Well, yeah, you really did.
We're getting they're finishing up, I understand, the solar project at the state capitol now too. That's moving along really well.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember how big that is, but they have it on the Senate office building, and they're also expanding to other buildings. And Xcel knows that there's a big demand for clean energy. And in other states, deregulated states, a big corporation like 3M could just go to a developer and say, let's cut a deal. I want to put power purchase agreement for 25 years. I'll buy 100 megawatts of your power. Well, you can't do that in Minnesota. So Xcel's created a program called Renewable Connect, and maybe many of you have heard about it, but initially most of it was business, and they did 100 megawatts, and they used a couple wind farms and a little bit of solar, and the state of Minnesota bought 33 megawatts of that, and then Minneapolis picked up like 20 or 30. So they sold out that in about a year, and now they're working on another 50 or 60 megawatts. It might be another 100. But my point is that what the state's doing is saying, okay, we're going to build as much as we can on all this land we own. And God, they own a lot of land. I mean, I don't remember the exact statistic, but I had it in one of my stories. It's like 7,000 sites. They could put a lot of solar in a lot of places. So to get the ball rolling, they bought from Xcel Renewable Connect, but then they executed a plan that would that they would continue to build solar as much as they could on their own buildings. And they also master contracted all this, so other communities can come in and buy electric vehicles through the state contract or solar panels through the state contract. So they were thinking beyond themselves too. I just did a story on, I'll tell you real quick and then end, but I've been working on a story on Organic Valley. They created a 32 megawatt project in southeastern Wisconsin. They're only going to buy part of it, but all these little co-ops were so excited that they all wanted to jump in and participate and be able to sell, be able to have solar panels on their site. But the killer for the project was the city of Madison's like the city of Minneapolis, right? They want to go 100% renewable. So they bought, I think it was 14 megawatts of this project. And in Madison's smaller, of course, than Minneapolis. So that was 37% of all the electricity needs for the city of Madison they can claim as clean energy. They're going to buy all the RECs from that 14 megawatts. Organic Valley is going to buy 12 or 13 megawatts RECs, and that'll help. And they're going to have so many RECs that they're technically above 100% clean. And they'll use that wiggle room to electrify everything in their fleet as much as possible. So they're, even in Wisconsin, which is not favorable to clean energy, things are changing dramatically, and so like the train has left the station. That's a good thing. It can't be stopped now. And so I mean, the problem with all this, though, of course, is when you write about this stuff, you could talk about this for days with people, and it's hard to narrow down a scope because there's so much going on in the solar field. Wind, so not so much, but solar, I would say, is where it's at. So keep your eye on that for the next couple years, because I think that's where a lot of the excitement is being generated for a clean economy future. With that, if you have any more questions.
I got a question. You look at a bigger scope than just us here in Minnesota, and you made a comment a few minutes ago about deregulated states. I wonder if you just expand a little bit on that, because at one time a developer told me that when Excel had us all shut down, in what year that was, but they were under review, so they had everybody, no permits were issued.
Right.
In Excel's territory, but in Texas, where it was unregulated, they say thumbs says, "Oh, it was great. Everybody just started building, putting solar panels on dog houses." They literally had to turn it back on so they could slow it, to regulate it, because it was just going, nobody was stopping them, or nobody saying no. So it was just you and your Uncle Louie go out there and put solar panels up.
Yeah, and what's interesting is when I interview the Conservative Clean Energy Caucus, they're all for solar. I mean, they have no trouble with it. In fact, they wish Minnesota would deregulate, because Massachusetts has, Texas, New York. So that means if you're in those states, the utility basically has to compete with other providers. And some of those providers are actually buying the energy cheap from the utility and reselling it on the open market and taking a margin of that. And others are going straight to a wind developer and saying, we'll buy all the RECs. We'll buy 100% of the RECs on that Massachusetts wind farm off the coast of Cape Cod, right? Or we'll take 10%, we'll take 20%, but they can cut the deal. They can buy a lot more clean energy with very little regulatory oversight, where everything here goes through the PUC at some point. So they don't, it goes through there, but it's a much wilder market. Someone told me when they moved to Texas, they got like five postcards from energy providers saying, hey, we'll give you this amount, here's our rates. And then they got another card from somebody else. So just a friend of mine who works for a Houston Houston company, that's what he does. He cuts big deals with corporate companies looking for clean energy. I mean, he's made a very good living off that. He doesn't do it here. All the clients are somewhere else. Yeah.
It seems to me that there's a potential problem with deregulating. In Texas, they built a brand new gas-fired power generation station, and that couldn't compete with the solar. But then, at some place, grid stability, you either have to tell the solar shut down during the day because I don't need that much power. And then at night, right now in Minnesota, I did a little short working job at North Star Steel, actually another foundry. They would get power at night given to them, and they would be paid for taking it.
Yes, because of the wind. Wind blows hard at night, and they would have not enough off-takers, right?
Well, and coal. And shut down coal plants.
And the nuclear plants have got to run steady.
Yeah.
It takes months to shut down a nuclear plant.
Yeah.
So that you can even work on it to do repairs. But without regulation, we could end up in a bind. Ross, a local guy named Ross, what's his name?
Abby?
Ross.
No, not that Ross, he doesn't know anything.
Nah.
The other Ross.
Brian Ross?
Well, Brian
Ross.
Yeah.
Brian Ross.
From Great Plains.
He's come up with a plan that shows how much renewables you can have before you start to create a bind. We're not going to create a bind today.
Right.
With our renewables, but there's a point where it starts to become very difficult. And at that point, in California, they have to throttle down the renewables.
Because of that duck curve in the afternoon, too,
Yes.
with all the sun. Yeah, I don't know that deregulation is an answer. I think there's partial deregulation that people have proposed where you could allow for a little of this selling.
CCA.
Yeah, I that's a little bit above my pay range, but there's how states regulate is playing a pretty important role in this.
Check out that report by Brian Ross. It really lays out as to how far we can go before we start to run into problems.
But the deregulation isn't going to change that.
No, it's not. Yeah, and even though storage, which is the other exciting thing, that costs still kind of expensive. Yeah.
We got time for one or two more questions. Anything, Chris?
Mine's a sort of very populist question. We're doing exhibits for the state fair. One of them is community solar gardens. Now,
Great.
you need, at the state fair, it's solar pollinator garden. And you only get a few paragraphs. You don't overwhelm anyone at the state fair. What do you tell people from all over Minnesota about community solar? If they're interested, do they go to the CERT's website and that's it? Do you tell them, like you say, there's utility scale, there's residential community solar gardens? Actually, there's residential community solar gardens and there's utility scale community solar. Do you call them a community solar garden if it's utility?
Well, they all
gardens.
have subscribers.
Or do you call it a solar farm
Yeah.
if it's a utility and a solar garden if it's residential?
Boy, that's a, well, I would, the community solar is truly community. So most of those, anybody can still buy into them. But the utility scale like Geronimo does and people like that might, if I were doing the exhibit, I would say, kind of break it up. There's community solar, there's utility scale. This is the one you can invest in. This is the one that your utility owns.
And should they be encouraging their utilities by voting like Trump does to do more community solar gardens or even solar gardens at their farms?
I think I'd probably separate it out so people understand. Here's one kind, here's the next kind, and then there's the kind on your rooftop. That's the third kind that you would own. And so those are maybe the three buckets. CERTS has you can type in your address and find out if your house has solar capacity. If the house is any good. I wonder if they have that for solar gardens. I don't think they do, but that would be great if you could type in your address and it would give you.
Minnesota has that map. That's the entire state.
It doesn't tell you where the solar gardens are.
Yeah, that's the thing. Here's the 20 solar gardens you could subscribe
So
to.
CERTS has recently redone their website.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it closely, but knowing that they have some new brochures on solar CSG for low income, that also lists where the CSGs are in Minnesota. I would think on their website they have CSG for the broader, a listing of them.
Also, people can run for their co-op boards. There's 171 co-ops and municipal power companies in Minnesota, and people can run for their co-op boards.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's more powerful than writing a letter.
I think that's been a big issue because there's been a lot of criticism of like when the board meetings are held and how well they're advertised to their members. And I got some emails from a guy who was telling me his friend thinks they made it almost impossible for him to run.
Co-op boards are like that. And usually the board member who's going to retire, his daughter or son, or his guy's coming in, and it's all done.
Politics are ugly.
It's a franchise.
The other thing that I found is really interesting when I talked to GRE says, we're owned by the co-ops. So I go to the co-ops and I say about the solar stuff, and they say, we can't do anything. GRE won't let us do that. And it's like, wait a minute, if you are the owner, why is that not flowing through kind of thing? So there's some interesting things going on there.
How do you think GRE is doing on solar?
They've been fighting it since.
They're not too bad. They put in a number of, actually they jumped ahead of Excel after we had the 2013 legislation, getting some sites all over, and I think it was like 16 of their.
I remember right about that. They did do a bunch of small ones.
But even like Dakota Electric, they helped them do one and they helped them do another, but they're not community solar, so that's kind of the confusion.
But they're the ones who said, we're forcing solar down, so rural old people have to eat cat food, so rich people in Lake Minnetonka can have solar. Remember that one?
Well, we've got to take a break. We want to thank you.
Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.